Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Pinkfresh Studio. In today's video, we are going to create this beautiful but easy interactive card featuring the new A2 slider dies, as well as I'm going to share with you how to ink blend these Delilahs and even create our own kind of custom shade of purple. We're going to start with the Artistic Dahlia stamp set. Now this is a large single stamp here with all the floral images, and typically with these large stamps you'll have to use a 12 by 12 MISTI, or you have to rig up your original MISTI in such a way where you can stamp on the front plate of the MISTI, but we're doing something a little differently today. The stamp is just right, just a little bit small, that allows me to angle it here into my MISTI and it will fit completely, and I'll just stamp it on this large piece of white cardstock. It's actually the full dimensions of the well of my MISTI, which is 6.5 by 8.5. I just stamped it in a fast drying ink. It doesn't matter what color this is, happens to be Coral Reef. You're going to leave that stamp though on your MISTI in the place that it is, because we will stamp this image again later in black to bolden those lines. We're now going to move on to the stencil set. This is the Artistic Dahlia stencil. There are 6 stencils in this set. Each one of them are labeled. This is stencil 1. We're going to do them in order. I'm going to line up this stencil with my stamped flowers. I did have it the right way, so I turned it back. Once I get that lined up with my flowers, I'm going to use a couple pieces of low tack tape to hold that stencil and panel in place. I'm going to start with Coral Reef here, and I'm going to ink blend all of the openings with this Coral Reef. I am going to try to ink blend the centers of these flowers a little bit more heavy-handedly, or apply more ink there so we get a little gradation at the center, so it's a little bit darker in the center. I decided it wasn't quite dark enough, so I did grab a darker shade of ink. This is Passion Fruit, and one of the new 1/2-inch blending brushes from Pinkfresh, which works perfectly for this, to ink blend the centers a little bit darker, so we have this really nice depth added to these flowers. We're now moving on to stencil number 2. I'm going to line this stencil up and then tape it in place. This stencil, we're going to actually create that custom purple color. I'm going to start by ink blending all the flowers with Raspberry Bliss, kind of like a medium kind of heavy-handedness, not super heavy, because we want to layer some ink on top of this and it still show up. The ink we're layering on top is Lavender, and these two colors layered on top of each other creates this beautiful new shade of purple, really vibrant, beautiful purple, and it looks even better once it dries completely. We're now on to stencil number 3. Going to line this up. This is the first layer for the leaves. I'm going to start with mint and just ink blend all of the openings with this nice flat shade of mint. Once we finish that, we'll move on to a darker shade, olive. We're going to use this to kind of create some gradations over these leaves. I'm again using that 1/2-inch blending brush, and I'm ink blending with this olive at the base of the leaves where the leaves would meet the stems. I'm also ink blending over the stems as well. It is in some places a little tricky to kind of tell where the base of the leaf is. Just do your best guess here. The thing that you just want to kind of avoid is completely blending a section completely over with olive. Then you will lose that gradation and you won't add that beautiful depth that the olive adds. Now I simply clean my stencil here with a dry microfiber towel, and now we don't have any of that residual ink on there to possibly kind of mixed with our yellow here, which is sweet mustard. Now I'm going to add just a small amount of yellow to some of the leaves and stems here, just a little bit, just a touch. This will kind of make those leaves a little bit more olive in some places, and just really add a lot more interest to these leaves because we're adding a new shade. We are now on to stencil number 4. I divide this stencil up into kind of 2 sections. Here, first starting with Raspberry Bliss and ink blending all of these smaller flowers with this beautiful pink color. Once I finish with that, we have remaining these openings over the purple flowers, which adds a detail or a flower centered to them, and I'm ink blending those with Regal Kiss, a nice dark purple that'll really add some depth to those beautiful purple flowers. When I finish ink blending those openings, we are actually done with this stencil, and we'll move on to stencil number 5. For stencil number 5, this is the centers to all of those big pink flowers that we did in the very beginning. I'm going to use passion fruit here again. I'm going to ink blend really heavy-handedly because, like you remember, we did use a little bit of this color in the beginning to kind of darken up the flower centers. So I'm going to be really heavy-handedly with this passion fruit so we get a lot of contrast and all these details show up on those big pink flowers. Now we're going to move on to stencil number 6, our final stencil. This is the detail layer for all the leaves. This one is a very simple one. Again, just going to simply ink blend all the openings with Evergreen, a really nice dark green, and this will add a lot of contrast so you really see those veins and shadows for those leaves. So now we're all done with our ink blending. It's time to pop this panel back into our MISTI because we're now going to stamp the outlines in black. The reason why I don't stamp them first is because they get kind of, you lose kind of the crispness when you ink blend over your black stamped lines. So by stamping it again, even though I'm taking a bit of a risk that it could shift while I'm stamping it, but it really does crispen up those lines and make it look so much more professional and clean. So here is our flowers after I stamped it in detail black from Pinkfresh Studio. And now we're going to move on to the coordinating dies. This is the Artistic Dahlia die set. I did have to trim down some of the excess white cardstock on my panel so it would fit through my die cutting machine because 6.5 width is a little bit too big for my die cutting machine. I lined up the die, then used a couple pieces of tape to hold the die in place when I ran it through, and you can see we've got all of our flower and leaves die cut out at once, which is super convenient. Now we're going to move on to this different stamp set. This is the Artistic Magnolias stamp set. I'm going to use a sentiment from this set. I'm going to stamp it onto some of that scrap cardstock that I cut off of the panel from our big panel, just stamped it in detail black, that sentiment. Now I'm going to use the coordinating die set for this, which has a die to die cut this sentiment, which I love. Cannot get enough of these coordinating dies for our sentiments. It's so handy. And now we're ready to start moving on to the interactive element. I have the A2 slider die set here, and I'm going to grab the 2 smaller dies in this set and die cut two heavyweight white cardstock panels with those dies. Then we will have these 2 panels here, the slider tag, which you see here on the right, and then my slider top, which is on the left. And I did flip that slider top over, so we're looking at the back side, and now I'm going to add 2 1/4-inch strips of score tape to the bottom slider fold section of this slider top. I'm going to remove the backing here, which I should not have done. I should have left it on because now I'm going to fold this. I should have left that backing on until I finished folding this. Now I flipped this slider top back over, and then I folded that folded section with a mountain fold in the center and then 2 valley folds on either side of that. Then I flipped it back over, so we're looking at the back of the top, and then we're going to adhere the tag to that area of score tape. And that is pretty much all there is to it. We just now have to adhere it to the card. I am going to quickly kind of create a little string kind of pull for my tag here, so I just feeded that through, kind of created a hoop in the back and then fed the ends through. So we have this simple little string to pull on, which is pretty and very handy to kind of get a good grip on and pull that slider open. So now we're going to move on to kind of the first step to adhering this to our card front, which is adding some foam adhesive to the sides. The foam adhesive just makes it move a lot more cleanly and neatly. I'm using 1/8 inch strips here, and I do it on either side, but I even add a little bit to the bottom. You may not, depending on how you've adhered your tag, you may not have room to do some foam adhesive on the bottom, and that's okay. If you don't have room, you don't need it. I did have a little bit of room there, so I added the foam adhesive. Now I have my card front, which has a pink panel glued to it in my card base, because before we adhere this slider mechanism to our card, we actually need to stamp our sentiment to the card front, because we won't be able to stamp it once that mechanism is adhered to the card. So I'm just grabbed some of my flowers, grabbed the mechanism, of course, and just kind of positioning everything temporarily here while it's in my MISTI to help me get the positioning of my sentiment. This sentiment is from the Artistic Dahlia stamp set, the same set we used for the flowers. Once I got it in the right place, I then removed the slider mechanism and the flowers, and now I'm ready to stamp that sentiment in detail black. Now that that's stamped, we're going to take our slider mechanism and go ahead and remove the backing on that foam adhesive, and then we will center this on the card front. After that's in place, we are now ready to kind of decorate this. We have to be a little bit mindful though of where we're adhering things so the mechanism can move cleanly. We're going to start here with this big floral arrangement. I'm going to stick it in the first larger section here, and I want to make sure that I don't place any score tape beyond that fold that you see, that mountain fold. So I've actually placed my score tape right at the edge of it. Then I'm going to add a tiny bit to the bottom just to kind of support my flowers a little bit more. I also don't want my flowers to go below the second score line or fold line, that valley fold that's just underneath that mountain fold. So, because then it won't fold up properly. So once I got that in place, I'm testing it here, making sure it works. Yep, that works great. I'm just going to now hold this slider mechanism kind of shut a little bit better, nice and flat. So I used a little piece of tape to kind of temporarily hold the flower and the slider thing down. Now we're going to move on to gluing this second kind of bundle of flowers, arrangement of flowers, gluing it in the lower right corner with some liquid adhesive. And then after I get it glued down, I quickly kind of open this up and then play and see if I can get everything opening and shutting properly. I do kind of have to lift up the flowers that are on the actual slider mechanism, lift the flowers and the leaves, kind of bend them up a tiny bit so they kind of slide nicely over the flowers. And then I have to adjust the flowers in the lower right corner down a little bit so they are a little bit more out of the way. So that with this, if you do this kind of arrangement of flowers, you will have to kind of play with it a little bit here and there to make sure it moves smoothly, but it will work. I did it a couple of times, so it's not too difficult to do. I did decide that my arrangement wasn't as full as I'd like it, so I did kind of peel back some of the flowers, the flower section or the flower grouping on the slider, and added this little bit of purple flowers, added a little foam adhesive again, and then tucked it underneath. Again, making sure that those purple flowers don't go, the adhesive for the purple flowers don't go past that mountain fold in the center of that sliding mechanism. So now we're actually done with adding the flowers to our card front. I'm going to add my sentiment. I did add foam adhesive to the back side of my sentiment and then doubled it up on the left side a little bit where when the sentiment hung off the flowers. You can see kind of on that G, it hangs off the flowers. So I did double up the foam adhesive there so it lays nice and flat. Once I stick that down, we have just some kind of additional decorating to do. I have these leftover flowers from that first stamping and ink blending, and I decided to just kind of add them to that slider tag. So I pulled the tag out, and now I did have to cut a little bit off so it didn't extend past the tag. And now I'm just kind of arranging these remaining flowers and leaves on that tab just to add some more interest, some more color to this card. Once I have it kind of the way that I want, I'm going to add some liquid adhesive and glue those down. And it is nice to know that you can add this little bit more of additional dimension, because we are gluing these cardstock die cut flowers to this tag, and it still works. It still slides beautifully even with that little bit of extra dimension from the cardstock on the flowers. And that will actually complete the card. Here, I'll hold up to the camera so you can get a good look at our beautiful flowers. Love that purple color that we created. And then I'll pull on the slider, and you can see that has a fun reveal of our second sentiment inside, and even that little surprise on the tag of more flowers. I love the way this card turned out. It's such a fun and easy interactive card. This slider, the A2 slider dies make it so easy to make this interactive element. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.